507 and 508. Is there any public comment?
No. Thank you.
Phone. Does anyone have any questions about the agenda? No one has any questions on the agenda, so I'm assuming that's approved by consensus.
I have one thing.
What's
On B, I'd like to talk about before the other items.
B?
4B, before 4A.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Do you have a problem with that, Ethan? Okay.
It's just the definition.
Sure. Do you have the definition which is supplied by Lexipol and we approved by vote of the commission before? So just to be clear, we can do B. Do you have the definition which the department supplied and was approved by the subcommittee and by the full commission?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, and by the full commission?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't remember any discussion of it.
Because we went up as.
Because it was a long time ago.
Yeah, we went up as the policy discussion, so if we're gonna change the should and shall, that's
Oh, I
okay,
see.
we're.
Okay, well, let's just.
This is not on the agenda, so,
Yeah,
but,
It was
well, let's go to B, we can do B and
October
A.
10th.
Okay.
We can do B and A,
Yeah.
yes, sir. You have no problem with that, Ethan?
No.
Okay. So yeah, so we'll do, 4B before we do 4A. Okay. If no one, so the floor is yours, Mr. Roberts, sir.
But
You're,
we're
we're on 4B,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I was gonna follow up on is our discussion last time, and that is that we decided we would highlight the definition of should to the commission, before they, especially before they go on with the rest of the program. And, you know, it'll be important with 302, I think. But, so I missed the discussion if it went to the commission before. So possibly these members of the commission have already looked at it and are okay with it. But as I said last time, one of the commissioners leaned over my shoulder and said, you know, there's an awful lot of shoulds in here, and I'm not sure the person understood what the definition of should is. It's really, if you haven't studied it, to the appearance of some people could be that it's totally permissive in a way, but the definition isn't really totally permissive, it's tighter than that. I'm not sure I totally agree with the definition, but it's better than permissive. So I was thinking before we actually go to the next round of Lexipol at the commission, that we would just make sure that the commission understood what the definition was.
We can certainly.
We've already done that, maybe I just missed the meeting.
Well, it was part of a general order, when we were talking about the beginning of the Lexipol policy.
Yeah.
One of the general orders specifically defines what the should
I've
and
seen it,
shall
yeah,
should be.
sure.
So we approved that one.
Yeah.
Subcommittee approved it when the Unpoxy went here and Izu was here, and then we moved it to the full
Right.
commission.
Was there any discussion of it?
Yes,
Of
we
the
had,
should,
we had,
shall?
yes, we had quite a lot of discussion about the should and shall.
You did.
And then we talked about the fact that at the Lexipol subcommittee level, we were going to assess where they should fall. What should be a should and what should be a shall.
Right.
So it's already being voted, we can certainly agendize it again and
Well-
re-vote it, but I mean, we also have a policy in place that we don't revisit votes, by
Yeah.
the full commission unless it's an exigent circumstance.
Maybe it could be more of a, if I may continue. Maybe it should be more of a reminder about what you voted on, of what the commission voted on.
Here's what I'm remembering, in the early days of this subcommittee, I wasn't on there, it was long before I was on there. But the idea was is that as long as the policies were about the same as the old policies, for example, then, the commission, the subcommittee was gonna look at those as best as possible. We knew it wasn't, reading every line and every word, and so then, you were gonna bring it back to the, full commission. And so it was more of a cursory sort of review to make sure it made sense with the rest. And so that was kind of the auspices that we were going under the first round of approvals. And so I'm not, at least I didn't realize, not being on the subcommittee, how the shoulds and shalls applied. Until later on, I got more in touch with it and sort of read more about it and read the actual, text. And they seemed like they were not, it wasn't in at least concert what I was thinking. So I'm not sure if other commissioners are that way. If you had the discussion, I guess I would just leave it at that.
But I think that, so there's two different things here. I mean, in my opinion, I could be wrong. What I hear you to say is, so you're correct, on the process there were three different things. If there were general orders that were not structurally changed in terms of the language, which is a complete and direct transposition from what the language is in one to the next one because it didn't exist or no changes were made, then that's one situation. If there's a situation in which there is a general order that Berkeley didn't have, that Lexipol has, that was not in existence, then that one required a much higher degree of review. If there were other ones in which within our looking at it, that there were some changes made to it, and we felt like the spirit of the original general order was not kept, that's where the should and shall came into play.
Right.
That is completely separate from a discussion on whether the should and shall definitions as assigned by Lexipol, in which they're operating as a directive under definitions on how they define the actions that a police officer should take according to the general orders. That's a much different conversation. If we believe that there has to be some education to one or two particular members of the commission who might still not be clear on what the definition of should vis-a-vis shall is, that's a much different conversation that now having to go back and saying we need to rechange that definition of what should is, make it tighter, change the language is not explicit enough, vis-a-vis what the meaning of shall is, as we continue to review those lexicals. If we do that, we're gonna have to have the agreement of the command of the Berkeley Police Department and the chief to do that. We cannot, certainly after saying that the should and shall definitions are appropriate and accurate, just because the commissioners need more alliteration of how it is evaluated, have to get into a definition with the police department. I can tell you that if you're going to redefine a should and shall, that might need to meet and confer standards. Because you're actually changing the dynamic of the directive to the police department and how they need to follow a general order. So, I mean, that's a concern that I have right off the bat thoroughly. If somebody doesn't understand the should, if somebody still believes at the commission level that a should seems to be more elective, even though it doesn't say, that's not what it says, and we discussed the language, which specifically says that there has to be not only exigent circumstances, but that there is why they fail to follow that process.
Do you want me to read it?
Really
Yeah, please.
rational base.
Yeah.
Should indicates a generally required or expected action, absent a rational basis for failing to conform.
Yeah, the failing to conform.
I know what the definition is.
So if there's a commissioner who still does not understand what that means, reasonable, failing to conform, if that needs to be tightened up, we're gonna have a much different conversation. I mean, what I think we talked about easy in the last meetings was, let's have a conversation on what something should be a should and a shall. Let's ask the department why it is for them a should instead of a shall, and make a determination based on that, on what a recommendation might be.
Order by order, as opposed to the general definition?
Order by order instead of the general definition. If we believe that something should be a shall instead of a should, and it doesn't meet the standard of the definition of failure to comply or reasonable circumstance, let's ask the police department why they think that should be a should and give us examples that are tangible, why that should be a should, and for the failure to comply to a shall directive, or what should not be a shall instead of a should, right? And then base that on the recommendations to the commission. But you're correct. If there is one or two commissioners who still have a question of what that level of obligation, process, and responsibility is between the should and shall, we can certainly have a conversation with them.
Yeah, I don't know about, more than one. All I know is I'm comparing, somebody asked me a question, And I was under the, earlier, before I got more into this, I was under the notion that, should was more permissive.
Than.
So,
More permissive than what?
rather than required, it's more permissive. And, you know, it's just kind of more of a definition in layman's terms, right? Should is should and shall is shall, but this is a definition that's a little tighter than that. So, anyway, that's all I was thinking, because I think it's, I know in one instance when we were comparing stuff at the commission meeting, I was looking at one, the general order, the old one and the new one, and it was basically the same wording, except the shalls in the old general order were switched to shoulds in the new Lexipol policy, basically the same thing. In you know, the same, rest of it was the same. So, and.
But we have asked the
another
department
couple
for
of
those,
things-
we have
Yeah.
asked the department for those changes, and we have had clarity from the department in those circumstances in which I have concern, why it went from
Right, I think it
shall to
came
should.
up around that discussion.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'd like to add to that, we being on this subcommittee for the last year, and with Commissioner Yapolsky at the time, and Izzy and George, we have, I believe, when there was a question, we've actually negotiated, and I think on some of the stuff, some of them, we looked it up and we're like, that's actually legislatively mandated, so we made those a shall. And so I think we've negotiated back and forth on what we thought, and just for an example, and I used this one before, we had an old policy about disabled motorists, and it used to say shall, and we were looking at that, and we had a whole expert working group that was going through and modifying and creating these policies. And the new one, it said we shall stop and render aid for somebody whose vehicle was broken down. Now they looked at that and they said that makes no sense. We were setting ourselves up for years that if I'm responding to a person choking, a shooting, a triple shooting, a homicide, a rape, you're mandating an officer to stop.
Yeah, I understand.
So we
There
of
would
course
be
in that
reason
one,
to
so we
change.
had that discussion. I remember George and I specifically had that discussion, and we said it made no sense, because the question came up, well, why did you guys change that from shall to should? And I was like, well, it's pretty obvious to me. I wasn't at the table, but it's pretty obvious to me. We would never want to mandate the officers to have to stop and skip a life-threatening issue as opposed to a rendering aid to a disabled motorist. So that was just one example, but we've had multiple where I believe 100% we've talked, and and I looked at it and I thought, oh, that's reasonable. We could make that a shall, But then there's some where, quite frankly, I've dug my heels in because I don't believe it, because out of practicality and we do operate in this gray field, this gray world, and we want our officers to be able to use discretion. It doesn't mean that we want them to kiss things off and not do the right thing. We expect our officers to do the right thing, and we believe that in most cases our officers do the right thing. And once again, if you go back to this definition of shall, it's generally required, but if they don't do it, they better have an explanation, a valid, legitimate explanation for not doing it.
For failure to comply. I mean, I wanna make that clear. I mean, that's almost like a military term, failure to comply. I mean, it's really a high standard. You have to really meet that high standard. So, I mean, and I understand what you're saying, that's why and not taking this example aside, there are other ones in which it's not as basic as this example.
No,
There are more complex ones in which the should and the shall, it's more of a complex, than just this simple example.
I mean, my only question that I raised before, and I still think I'm okay with the current language, but is rather than a rational basis, good cause, which, might.
Yeah, we had a little discussion of that before, and we were kind of looking at something that would be as tight as possible without boxing them in, because they need flexibility. The question is, how much flexibility you need? And,
But that's what I said, that if you review the general orders and their should and shalls, let's review the should and the shall specifically. Because if it's an administrative kind of thing, if it's a kind of a process kind of thing,
On
then we
each
can,
one?
well, that we can say, well, that should be a should and that should be a shall. It, like, I give you the best perfect example, reporting uses of force, right? That should never be a should, that should always be a shall. I mean, and that's a perfect example of other circumstances in which a should is more applicable than a shall.
Yeah.
I'd rather we evaluate them, and again, based on that, on the definition that we have, and the applicable use of that terminology for each individual directive, then trying to change the language to set a directive that might or might not fit individually one particular sentence. Because that might just be a shall,
Right.
not a should. I mean, so why change the should to be closer to shall, so that we can placate some kind of sensibility that might not even be practical? I mean, but that's just me.
Yeah.
I'd rather implement the shall
Yeah.
and give people the discretion on the should. If it should be a should, or it should be a shall, let's make it a shall. But let's hear from them why it should be a shall. But if we're gonna change the definition to be what you're saying,
Well, I'm not even saying-
that's important too.
Yeah, I'm not even saying, I'm just saying that's a potential because I'm actually fine as I've thought about it more with rational basis simply because I'm suspecting that an officer, you know, in a situation, I don't want to be in a situation where we're second guessing the officer's ability to determine sort of what was good cause and whatnot. So if they had a rational basis that they were thinking about in the moment and it was rational, it wasn't irrational, it wasn't unreasonable, which is what rational means, then I'm willing to defer to an officer in that situation using their judgment. You know, there's a wide range of potential exceptions.
Right.
But it does have to be reasonable, it does have to have a rational basis. And if they're in the bounds of reasonableness, I'm willing to defer to that, because we're talking about if someone violates a policy, is that misconduct? And I'm like, there's a difference between making a mistake, right, and not having perfect judgment or not having judgment about reasonable, and something that rises to the level of misconduct. So I'm saying if that rises to the level of misconduct, so that I'm okay with them being in the world of a rational basis where they can articulate and reasonably explain what they were thinking and why they were through. Just from a legal perspective, that's how I see it. I do agree with Jordan. Go through order by order, and it should say shall change it, require it. But, you know, or change it to, then that can change it shall. If there's specific ones where you're like, this really should require good cause, not just a rational basis. So let's
Change
find
our
that
language.
specific one and put that language in there.
That's right. Which is what we
It
did.
should, absent good cause,
That's right.
you know, we can put that language in. So
Which
there could
is
be
what-
three options, there could be should absent good cause, and shall.
Yeah, which is what Allison Berkeley did in some general orders and broader discussions. You know, that whole conversation about absent exigent circumstances.
Or actually, you would put a
That in there.
shall absent good cause.
Yep.
That's what you would,
Shall
so
what?
should, as the definition is there, then there'd be shall, just period, and then there would be shall absent good cause.
Right.
That's the
right.
third
That
one,
would be the other way.
you should do it absent good cause. If there's good cause, then you can explain, great.
Yeah.
That's an in-between shall and the should with the current definition.
Yeah.
But that should be looked at as on an order-by-order basis, if there's something that.
Yeah, I mean, this says shall or will indicates a mandatory action.
Right.
Now, that's the other thing, is you don't wanna start confusing people on definitions
Yeah.
when they're operating, we're operating like that, it's happening now. So they have to have that stuff.
That's on general.
That's why shall or will, I mean, they know, that's a mandatory thing, and then this should indicates to me, it's pretty simple, indicates a generally required or expected action, absent a rational basis, meaning I have flexibility here as long as I can justify it.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'm willing to look at them on a case-by-case basis. But, you know, my thinking on it was, before I got on the SUBCOM, and then when I first got on the SUBCOM, is, well, wait a minute, you know, there's hundreds of these things coming through, and we're trying to work with the department to get them through. But in a way, we own them. And that is, we're approving them.
Well,
right, and
but
so
with
if
a-
you
with a
come out
law-
later and there's a bunch of things that are in there that shouldn't be in there in terms of shoulds or shalls, and things are coming up in hearings and stuff like that, and the guy got off because, you know, he really should have done this, but he didn't, and blah, 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 then we own it.
Yeah, but to me, it's a high level review, and if there's any of these things where people think that substantively, you know, this should is a problem, well, then they should agendize it for the commission, we can set up a subcommittee and see what that one can change. But I just think process-wise, with the number of ones that we're going through, you know, efficiency, I mean, God, it's been a year already, I mean, we gotta get these things.
I understand.
If there
And
is
so-
a determinative factor that says that the general order is failing to operate on the best standards set by the city of Berkeley and city council, and that individual order needs to be reviewed at that much detail level that should and shall, in terms of directive to the police officers, that should be pulled out, create a separate subcommittee, and reviewed at that level, not here. So, I mean, and that would be a policy review.
Yeah.
That would be a full policy review based on that. I mean, and that's, I think, that's what you're
Yeah,
saying.
100%.
I mean, so, but if we think that there is a directive at this level, that we think that should be a shall and should, based on the review of the past general order, and we do not get a reason enough from the department that says to us, that is a should council for shall, we can continue to push that to the city, to the commission, the commission can have their thing. If we really feel that strongly that that should be a shall, we can throw that at the city manager, and we can throw it to the city council. But, I mean, but that's a much higher level of review.
How does Bart define it?
So Bart defines it the same way, because not only is
Lexipol?
Bart full Lexipol, but they're Kalika as well. Bart is one of the only police departments in the Bay Area who are fully approved and accredited. And that was an extensive work of 3 years by the YPA, the BPCRB, and the department.
So they're the exact same definition?
Yes, the should and shall is defined under the same, on the same way. And so we argue, or we go back and forth on where the should and the shall should be based on that definition. If they're gonna stick to that definition, well, let's review it based on that definition, and let's argue the merit of the should and shall independently. Let's not change the definition to set some kind of a narrative when it could be conflicted against what the whole general order might be able to do. I'd rather fight the shows where they should be instead of worry about the shoulds where they shouldn't be. So we did a whole electrical review of every single general order. We created 10 different general orders in the last 5 years. We got Kalika accreditation by the Bart Police Department, and Lexipol is in play. And every time there's a general order, it comes to us first. There's a different process at Bart. At Bart, the department, before they make any changes or any kind of conversational implementation, they bring it to us. You know, we get a subcommittee, we get a complete review, we put the chief right there in front of the stand and we talk about it. Members of the board of directors are present, sitting on the periphery, listen to our discussions, so they know that either we figured out here or we're gonna figure out the board of directors. So it's a much different process.
But basically, you're living with the same definition.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, the same definition.
As our 90-something, 95% of California agencies are using Lexipol.
Yeah.
The same definition.
Yeah, I understand, and, you know, I'm all for continuity and all that, but I'm kind of suspicious of Lexipol. in the
Well,
first place.
sure.
And I always have been, because, you know, they're on contract with police departments and they write things that give them more flexibility rather than less, is what I think.
And that's where we come in. Oh, I'm with you. I do not disagree with you. That's where we come in on the shoe and the show. That's exactly.
And then all of a sudden it becomes the gospel, because everybody adopts it, right? So-
But you're correct. If we approve it, we own it.
Well, I agree with you that there is an aspect to Lexipol, and there were some good articles we read, some law review articles, that there was a tilt towards litigation protection.
Yeah. I think that, you know, probably, you know, if Lexipol was on contract with the council, you know, those things might look differently.
But they're in contract with the council, because council is paying for this.
I know,
City
but
the department doesn't have a budget to pay for this,
Yeah,
and the
no, I
city council
understand. I
and the city
understand.
manager
I
approves it.
understand.
So.
But they're not supervising it, yeah.
that's what will come in.
Right, right.
So, I mean, but that's what I'm saying, I mean, in Berkeley, we're different. And oversight is here to determine
Yeah.
what in excess of the Lexipol requirement the city or district or municipality has as a much different mandate, to go beyond that baseline and say, that should be a should and a shall according to Lexipol. We actually would like to require that as a necessary step before you take this action.
Yeah.
That's where we come in. So you're right, we approve it, we own it. That's what the review is.
Right.
But I wanna say that if we have that much of a substantive concern about a general order, we need to pull it out and put it
Yeah.
for a different subcommittee to review.
Okay, well, as far as I'm concerned, because we've kind of killed a lot of time with this, you know, I could live with it, I don't care if it goes on the council, on the commission next time, unless, you guys see the wisdom in it. I'm willing to look at it on every policy.
Wisdom,
But,
that's a
you
big
know,
word.
Yeah, but, you know, it gets a little old on every policy too, to try to second guess everything. So, I'm trying not to do that and give the department some flexibility. On the other hand, I approach it in the standpoint of, well, if I was a cop, I'd need to know specifically what the hell the rules are and not see a whole lot of flexibility in there, in terms of what I could do and what I couldn't do. And if I was in the community seat, I would want to, if I read that, I would wanna make sure that I understood that certain things are flexible and certain things aren't flexible, you know, and then if that was a valid balance, so.
Well, I understand that in the community perspective, but I'll defer, I mean, I think I'm gonna defer to the department on whether they wanna have more discretion or not, so that, whether that's what you put over there.
Yeah.
In terms of how orders are written.
Okay, so let's
I'm
move on
good to
to,
proceed, but.
so let's move to 4A, cause there's only 3 of them, so that's early.
Chair, there's actually only one, because I shouldn't have, we're still waiting for an update on 337, so that was a mistake and I forgot.
And what about 3?
And 333, I did not get the revision yet, so
Oh.
really you only have 302.
Okay, well, then that should make it easier, cause I'm sure that the conversation will last that
Yeah.
long.
I have a question.
So, so we can go to 302, did everybody received the proposed changes that were sent from the last Lexipol subcommittee meeting that went to the chief of police and the chief of police, and the chief Greenwood sent back to us? Do you folks have those
Yeah.
last changes?
Well, that's also in the, I emailed it separately, it's also in the packet, so you
That's
should
right.
have it.
But we didn't get it.
We did, was
Well,
email.
it was email, you didn't get a mail.
Oh,
Because we just did
I
the
got
agenda
it.
yesterday.
Yeah, I printed it.
I got it.
Yeah.
I got it. So what I'm giving to you, so I read all that. I mean, I think the changes are basically, our conversation, easy when you weren't here, we were talking about what were the well, the full commission had a presentation on spit hood masks and we had some conversation, we had input from the community, the chief answered some questions. I'm gonna forget the name, Officer Wade.
Yes.
But our subcommittee level, we have some questions about language related to specific circumstances that could be taken into consideration based on a medical condition or that showed a possible medical condition and what that was.
Right.
We talked about the excessive bleeding around the mouth. We went back and forth.
Yeah.
The chief supplied the language which we have now, which we had in the email and was supplied to us in terms of the changes, with some things out and specifically. What you have in front of you now as well, I mean, and I'm just trying to figure out a way in which, for the record, I do believe that the police officers should continue to use the hood, spit, and masks. I think it's a necessary tool that they have to use, so I am on the record of that. But I'm also very cognizant of the fact that there's a pushback from the community in terms of how they look and how they might or might not make someone feel or be viewed by other people that are peripherally looking as the person is having a hood.
Kind of like, is there a difference between a spit mask and a spit hood? Or is this just a
Technically,
semantic?
yes, technically, yes. But we've had both in the past. Right now, currently what we have is would technically be called a spit hood. And that is something that goes over the head, the entire head. A mask would be,
Should have brought it for you.
Like a mosquito.
I have one at home.
yeah, and that's kind of, we brought several of them and they tried them on and they were putting them on and so, but yeah, it's more like it's a really light mesh
Yeah.
bag, which allows for easy breathing and fluids to exit, heavy fluids like vomit or something like that. However, it doesn't allow for spit. I mean, a little bit can get out for a little teeny, you know, the point is to prevent the person from being able to spit on us.
Or to have
I
an
just-
easier home.
But that, I was just curious, cause when I just saw the term change from hood to mask, I wasn't sure whether, I know like people been talking about like particle mask, like N95.
Well, yeah,
Or
so
surgical.
there was some language in the Mental Health Commission's report about just giving the officers N95, we have N95 masks, but that doesn't stop the person from spitting on us or creating, you know, the potential for transmittable diseases, et cetera, et cetera.
But per our meeting last week, at least when I asked the question, what's the difference between a spit mask and a spit hood? Basically, they say they're the same thing.
Yeah, so we just.
Yeah. So it's just terminology somehow, it's a little different.
Well, like, no, but I mean, like, one would, we refer to them all the same, but one would say a spit mask is just something like a string, like an N95 mask per se, but that doesn't meet the criteria. So we could put that on, in theory, you could try to put something like that on a suspect or a detainee who's trying to spit at you, but they don't, the reliability of it staying on is slim to none, and you put yourself at risk trying to get it onto the person, as opposed to just taking the hood and going, whoop.
I guess
Slide.
my only question is, at least the version that I have, it's saying we're changing the terminology to spit mask. But what you're saying is we're not gonna be using spit masks, we're gonna be using spit hoods.
Yeah, it does change it to spit mask.
Yeah, well, we went back and forth on that last week, and honest to God, I don't remember. It didn't, yeah.
I-
Cross
But I
it
think we
out
need to
with-
make sure.
Hoods and socks.
This is, yeah, the order has a spit, hood, masks, sock, right? It has all three words
I
there.
think what we're all talking about though is the same thing.
Yeah,
Have you
I-
ever
I-
used those 95 masks for spitting?
Never,
No.
never on a suspect and never on me.
Never.
Nope, never.
Yeah, so I'm not sure why the terminology got out there somehow, because they never used it anyway, so
What-
why they call it
You
a
use-
mask, I don't know.
You use one for spitting?
No.
Oh, no.
I just wanted to them to smoke.
Oh, yeah, no, we issue them,
right.
we issue them not only for officers, have them for a myriad of things, when we go to fires, a structure fire, and you're stuck on a traffic post, guarding the hoses and, you know, everything, so fire department can do their thing. There's all sorts of toxic and materials and things that are blowing, so we
But you
use them
don't
for that.
use it for spitting, you know, so I don't.
I was
don't
wondering whether it
understand.
would even be effective for spitting, I mean, that's why I was asking.
That's not what they're
because
designed for.
I could see someone being able to maneuver to get an N95 off their face down over their chin.
Yeah, it's so loose and.
It's very
Which is
simple.
totally different.
You can
Yeah.
take, I've seen suspects do things all the time, but I can tell you right now, you can handcuff me, put a N95 mask on me, and I can go like this, right on my shoulder, and it's coming off.
Sure.
Within 2 seconds.
Didn't seem like it'd be effective.
But a spit mask is not an N95 mask, is it?
It's not a what?
Okay.
Why are we
It's
Correct.
not
trying
an
to spit
N95
mask? I mean, to me, this just seems
No,
like a PR
no.
thing.
So the question is, what
I want it to be
should be the
accurate.
right terminology?
Let's have an accurate terminology, which should be spit hood, let's put spit hood in it, you gotta live with it.
You know, what's the right terminology for it? If it's not a mask, is it a hood? If it's not a hood, it's a sock.
That's what it seems like.
So-
Well, it is a hood.
I think the issue is that there were, if you said any hood, mask, or sock, hood, mask, or sock, I'm thinking the same thing. But I think it's because people call them different things, but I don't know, I don't have the Lexipol definition of, no, I'm.
Does the department intend to use all three words in the general order to cover the basis, or are they going to make one specific choice?
Well, based on this, it's masks, the final would be a mask.
Okay, is that intended, so no hoods, then these things that go over your ear and nose, or?
I don't, yeah.
They're calling a spit mask the hood, and that's basically what they're saying.
So if
They just read it.
if that's a big deal, then we, you know, once again, this
I don't
is.
think it should be confused. If what we're talking about is if things go over someone's whole head, that seems like we're talking about it. I'm not trying to call it. If it's just like trying to change the semantics to avoid some PR problem, to me, that's a mistake, because that's gonna cause confusion.
I was gonna say the same thing.
Yeah, I don't think that, I don't believe that.
Well, I think that at some level, there is that cognitive understanding that people think that a hood, and then they think Iraq, Abu Ghraib, and all that other stuff,
Yeah.
because it's a hood over your head. So abductions, blah, 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 so it has become part of the other narrative. But, so we need clarity on that as well from the chief. What is it that he's gonna call it? Because I think that if it's a hood, then let's call it a hood.
Well, he and I together.
And I'm not against it, I mean, I'm not against necessarily the hood, so I'm just saying, I think it should be.
No, because that's what we use, I mean, what we use.
When you open the
box.
box and it comes in from Amazon Prime, what does it say on the box? Does it say hood? If it says hood, that's the URL, that's what it is.
I don't know, I've never opened up the
Like
box.
Amazon Prime. I mean, when it comes in the box from the invoice, that's what it is. If the invoice says hood, it's a hood. I mean, you know, not to call a spade a spade.
It could also come in and says 3M product 5692.
Then let's call it 3M product 53867-1.
Well, that's the issue. I've got a couple of them, we'll get to them.
So, I mean, so we.
We came down to 302.10, right? Application. This was the major point of contention. And when we left that night, I said I'm willing to switch this to shall, right? In fact, this doesn't even look like.
I'm reading the changes here, yeah.
Yeah, paragraph 4. It came. That was the big discussion we had. Was spit masks shall not be used in situations where there are indications that the restrained person has a medical condition evident in the area around the mouth and nose.
And I missed the discussion at last week's meeting, and I did not watch it. But why remove the language about bleeding profusely around the area?
That was the vote. So that was part of our discussion two or three meetings ago that you were present for. Once again, if you just seen the presentation we did, part of the problem with eliminating the blood part, or saying we were concerned about bleeding profusely in the definition. And also there was another word in it, so this kind of connects. There was another word in here, let me see where, and we did change it because I know Commissioner Roberts had an issue with it. It seemed like there was some confusion. It said, in such cases, I think the language was, in such cases, prompt medical care should be obtained. I think that confused him and led him to believe that we would stand there, call for help, and not do anything. Every officer with us is state mandated to be first aid CPR instructor, and certified, and we are. So what I even did in your case was the chief and I agreed, and we changed it, should be provided. So in other words, we're not gonna stand there because there was a question, he said, so how long does it take for the fire department to get there? Well, we're not gonna sit and wait for the fire department. If we have to take medical, action on medical care, we're gonna provide that. Where the concern is that when you add blood into the spitting, you've now exacerbated the problem because there's bloodborne as opposed to aerial transmittable diseases. So the way that thing was written was basically if somebody's bleeding from the mouth, which people bleed all the time, and we were going to get into this definition, I said absolutely. The concession was we would add shall not be used in situations where there are indications that the restrained person has a medical condition evident in the area around the mouth or nose, such as difficulty breathing, vomiting. So we changed it to shall, but we took the specific blood out of there. So that so that a trained officer, if they feel that they need to give care, can then give care as needed, as they're trained and certified by the state of California to give them medical treatment, basically. But the fact that somebody's bleeding actually makes it worse. And I can tell you from my personal experience, and I think the question came up in the full commission asked, how many times and what have you seen with your experience? And most people, in my experience, I can't speak for everybody else, in my experience, once you put it on and they realize it's not effective, their spitting is not effective, they chill out and they stop. But most of the people I've seen, when we arrive, a lot of them already have been in some altercation for whatever the circumstance might have been prior to our arrival. A lot of people are bleeding already. And when they start spitting, then we have not only an aerosol-based transmission possibility, but we have a bloodborne. And so therefore, we definitely don't want to corner ourselves where we're saying, oh, if somebody's bleeding. And then once again, my experience, and I think it's well known that mouth cuts, when people bleed from the mouth, they tend to bleed more. Head wounds and mouth bleed more. So that's where we had this discussion 2 or 3 meetings ago last year, where Commissioner Perezvelez and I were talking about your definition of bleeding profusely might be significantly different than mine from my experience, where I've seen people bleeding significantly from the mouth, and it looks worse than it really is. If somebody, so that's why we decided to make the change, that if there's a medical, in my trained professional evaluation, that I think somebody has a medical condition, we're gonna give care as needed. But we're not going to risk more officers being exposed by just taking out because somebody's bleeding. That's gonna eliminate probably, anecdotally, 80 to 90% of your application.
And, okay, I get that. And also on paragraph 3, and I think George has this at least in his handout as well, if I was interested in it. It says officers utilizing spit hoods, masks, whatever, should ensure that the spit hood mask is applied properly to allow for adequate ventilation. I can't see why that should be should.
Yeah.
Is there any circumstance in which you wouldn't allow for adequate ventilation or a person breathing normally?
Are you talking about the paragraph above that?
Yeah.
Yeah, paragraph. That seems right, it should be a shall.
Well, anytime you put it on there, there's not a circumstance. They all put them on their heads. I mean, if it's on your head.
So, I mean, I understand it, but I just can't see why it should be should apply it in a way to allow for proper ventilation and that the person can breathe normally as opposed to shall.
Captain, the picture is this.
Any circumstance in which you should apply it, the person should not be allowed to breathe normally.
The picture is this. If the narrative is right now that the concern is basically just based on medical conditions, possibility repercussions of an incident in which someone has an adverse reaction, which creates a medical condition that makes it liable. If that is the narrative, which is what I've heard in excess of how they look on someone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then let's eliminate every single incident in which that narrative can exist by saying, let's take that out of the narrative. If it's a medical concern that the folks that are against the use of this spit hood mask, whatever it is, sock, might be, then let's take that completely. Let's make sure police officers are saying, yeah, we're gonna make sure that there is proper ventilation. If any other condition exists, we're gonna look at it and we're gonna remove it, and if there's vomiting, we're gonna remove it as well. So we have put into place wording and changes that take that narrative completely out, without necessarily changing the directive of the police department being able to use them. At least that's from,
Yeah, I
I'm
just
looking
don't
at
see
it.
any reason an officer should have any discretion to use the spit hood in a way that would inhibit someone's normal breathing.
It would inhibit what?
Yeah, I
A
mean, yeah.
person's normal breathing. So.
I guess I'm looking at it as if I put that thing on, there's almost no way other than to intentionally pull the string.
I got it.
And I don't know there's any way.
Then there won't be a problem, so it should be shall. You shouldn't have discretion, like, let's say someone put the hood, this is extreme, but let's say someone put the hood on with, the shirt, wrapped up around their head or something around their nose and the hood over that. I'm not saying anyone would do that, but if someone did, that to me would be misconduct. And so it shouldn't, I don't wanna give some rational, try to give some discussion. I just don't see where there should be discretion here. Because we're talking about adequate breathing, we're talking life and death, so.
Particularly if somebody's going to have somebody's gonna come at you and saying that the person will hyperventilating. They're hyperventilating, oh my God, you're causing a medical condition. So it's proper, it's fastened. We make sure that it's fastened properly in a manner which creates proper ventilation and the person can breathe normally. That's your answer, no narrative, moving right along.
I agree with that, it was on my list too, but why would that be should?
That's the only other shell that I had there from the handout that I give out.
Okay, I'm gonna note it and I'll talk to the chief about it. I guess my concern is I feel like we got past all this and now we're going back. I think we had gotten to paragraph 4 and now we're going backwards again. So
In the original changes, which was that 300 shells, this one was still there. I think in the last meeting we focused on paragraph 4. We didn't look at paragraph 3 because our discussion was pretty much centered on paragraph 4. We never went back to look at paragraph 3 for that particular one.
On that point, cause I remember you brought this up last time, so really the last meeting, we only talked about 4, as I remember.
That's right.
Because we ran out of time or something.
well, this is
And,
like the third time that we've talked about it.
yeah.
Because we talked about it last year.
But, I'm in a bit of a quandary because, on the first round or so that you guys did this, I wasn't on the subcom. But when I read this, I have quite a few shall should questions. And, the question is, well, there's concern about going back over stuff, but, I still have the questions. I guess I could raise them at the meeting.
Yeah, I mean,
I could
that was
raise
my
them
initial concern.
But I'm just saying, I don't wanna tread back over old ground because you guys have already approved some stuff. Yet, on the other hand, I don't quite feel comfortable without a discussion on it, so I could just do it at the PRC meeting.
But that will not serve a purpose. You have to do it now or don't do it there. And I'll be honest with you, the reason we're having this meeting
Okay,
is to
well,
get out of the discussion.
Captain
so we can
Rolary
have-
is
Okay, well, let's
so
go
keen
through
on
the
We
sheets.
can agree or you can
redoing.
agree or disagree.
Let's go through the sheets.
Yeah, you can
Let's
agree,
go
we
through
can
them.
agree or disagree.
Let's be efficient about it, cause we got.
Yeah.
I guess it's not only I do. Let's hear the sheets.
Okay,
Let's hear it.
let's just do 3 and 4 or 4 and 5, or, well, I don't know what paragraphs those are, let's stay on those for a minute. So, we're talking now on officers utilizing spit masks, we're saying shall ensure that the spit mask is properly, for ventilation, properly done for ventilation, right? That, we already gone there,
All
right?
three.
Yes.
So, the next question is on the next line. It says officers should provide assistance during the movement of restrained individuals due to the potential for impaired or distorted vision on the part of the individual. And it says officers further should avoid commingling, I don't have a problem with that line. But the second line there is, they should provide assistance during the movement of restrained individuals due to the potential for impaired or distorted vision. So I don't, my question was, well, should that be shall? I mean, if the person's being moved around and they can't see,
I'm fine with should, because it's like, is there some reason not to? Like, you have to give it, you have to articulate.
Indicates a
why you
generally,
would.
indicates a generally required or expected action
So,
in absolute
yeah.
rational basis. Now, if somebody's getting around, they can see fine. if they can see fine, then I shouldn't have to
No.
help direct them. But if they are, or they appear to have impaired or distorted vision, then I should step in and grab them by the arm or whatever it is.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not,
So-
I don't have a problem with discretion on this area, I mean, I can see there's
Okay.
periods where there should be discretion.
All
I
right.
mean, correct me, I mean, that's just my thought, I didn't mean to interrupt, I'm sorry.
That's okay, I'm okay. So let's go back down to 4 again. So you change the shall, spit, mask, first sentence, shall not be used, blah, 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 blah. And then on the next sentence, it says, in such cases, prompt medical care should be provided. So where does the should come from? And why wouldn't it be shall?
Again, I could think of a rational reason why someone would not be able to do it immediately. You know, there's like a fight going on next to it, or something that's more pressing.
Doesn't say immediately, it just says,
It says prompt.
well, prompt,
It says
yeah.
prompt medical care. So-
Well, that's a-
So there is, you know, there could be something else, like, you know, there are two that it comes up, it just requires the officer's attention. Like, to me, the shall on the one that we agreed on, like, not being able to breathe normally, like, that's like there should be no discretion, it's like life and death. Whereas this, to me, I could see circumstances where it wouldn't necessarily be life and death to get medical condition immediately, and maybe something else pops up that's very significant. So you gotta give a rational reason, but it's at least.
Okay, if you can see a rational reason, I'm fine, I'm just raising the
Two other
questions.
people fighting, right?
I'm raising the questions that, to me,
Mhm.
felt like it should be, a little more required, let's put it that way. And when, on the sentence you provided, the same sentence, it says, the prompt medical care should be provided. The presumption, your presumption is by BPD personnel?
Anyone,
Hmm?
anyone. That was what, I changed that specifically for you.
No, I understand that, you said obtained, and this is said provided. And so I'm trying to understand, if I'm an officer, does that mean I do it, or I call somebody else to do it? And-
I thought that was answered at the full commission.
It
I
was.
think they answer your question, the chief answered, they're EMT trained, they're even EMT qualified.
No, we're not, we're CPR.
I got all that, I got all that.
So
It just
anyone-
says should
anyone
be
present.
provided.
Yeah.
Is that the assumption then, we're all assuming then?
What's the alternative language that you think is best?
Huh?
What's the alternative language that you think is better?
I would say provided by BPD. I mean, provided could be you call 911 or something, you know?
But we wouldn't call 911, we're there, we're
Yeah,
trained, we're there, we're trained. I think we try to give it general provided, so that means it should be provided by someone, whether it's an officer there, whether the fire department might already be on scene.
Right, you just
or
said it should be provided by someone, okay, well, there you go.
But that's an inference that anyone who has the ability to provide the service will.
we could have
You
the
wanna say
fire
in
department
such
on scene
cases-
already, so if I said Berkeley Police, then I would say, sorry fire, you can't
How about
treat this
How about
person.
this? How about this? In such cases, an officer, should provide or cause to be provided prompt medical care.
That would be good with me, it was more, a little more specific, other than just provided, it kind of just leaves it open. I mean, that's more like somebody could
It's
read
very
it.
legalistic, I mean, but I'm just saying, if we're trying to.
But we're not into legalistic,
I
here.
know, I'm
we're
just-
about operational policy.
What I really get confused in these discussions is, what is the level of comfortability that each one of us individually has to have in terms of linguistics in order for it to assuage some concern that you individually might have, because you don't see the language that you might like, but it doesn't fulfill or completely circumvent the operational
Well,
directive.
let's put it this way, so it sounds like you guys are okay with providing.
But we are
I
concerned.
think it just leaves it open, but I mean, I'm okay.
I thought obtained was, and that's why, that's specifically why I changed it just for you, because you were.
No, I
I think
understand
what
what you're
Commissioner
saying.
Roberts is focused on is not the verb obtain versus provide, but who the subject is.
Right.
So who will take the action? I, sort of think that this, implicit is an officer, but if you want to say explicitly the
Our
officer.
conversation was that
it's an
obtain,
officer.
the word to obtain was more open about who the hell is it?
No, I
Who do we call? Well, let's obtain some medical help.
That-
So they changed to provide means you need to do this as an action.
Well,
As a
you have
military
to-
man, I see provide,
I think
now
it's better.
action
I
taken.
think it's better, but it's not still clear.
Obtain
Why don't we
means
keep,
get.
why don't we keep going?
So, it doesn't, I'm
Okay
okay
with
with
that.
either one. The question is whether you explicitly state the subject of being the officer. I understand the captain's issue, which is not necessarily the captain who will, or that the officer who will provide it. So that's why I say causes.
The officer-
It could be both, it could be a nurse who's passing by, it could be a doctor, that's happened plenty of times in my.
That's why that's
somebody's
the only
injured.
reason I say.
Are you the captain in
provide or
charge
cause.
of the standards?
Professional standards, yeah.
He's on the record. He's on the record saying that that's what it is, that the officer will provide. He's on the record. So, I mean, if we ever have a board of inquiry in which you have a question to obey or provide, was it the captain over there, the captain in charge of standards, on the record said, it is the police officer who's done it. And he's a representative of the department. That should be, that's a substantive answer. I mean,
I'm saying.
This is
well,
not
I
here.
also generally think that these orders apply to the
No,
officer.
because you're
So like, for example,
steering on
if
the
you wanna
record.
get really, persnickety about these, then you could say, okay, if a person vomits while wearing a spit mask, it says the spit mask shall be promptly removed and discarded. So then it would be a question of like, well, who should remove it and discard it? I mean, my assumption here is that the officers are supposed to be doing it.
Well, yeah, the policy is, the
It's
policy
directed
is for
towards
the police
officers.
department.
Yeah.
It's not, our policies don't govern, AMR ambulance, Berkeley
Right.
Fire Department. You guys walking down the street, the policy is guides us. And there's no policy, as we've talked before.
I think all of these
It's gonna-
apply to the officer. Like the last paragraph, those who have been placed in a spit mask should be continually monitored and shall not be left unattended until the spit is removed. Well, it doesn't explicitly say who should be doing the monitoring, but to me, the presumption is it's the officer.
If you didn't provide a medical assistance to the
We're done.
person,
Let's move
then you'll
on.
have to reasonably explain why you didn't do it, why you failed to comply to provide medical assistance. Always remember the should definition when you're reviewing this. Way beyond the linguistic comfortability level. Why is it that you reasonably did not supply or provide medical condition? Why did you fail to comply to do so? That's the definition of should. If you can't explain things based on that and you still have a doubt, let's stick to it. If you don't, when you say, why do you have to explain now why you failed to comply? What was the reasonable explanation why you did not provide medical condition? If you think a police officer can look at you and say that and not be under the duress of having to behave in a manner improper, I'm with you. I just don't think there is. I just don't think that legal way, that linguistic concern you have exists.
Yeah, well, I read it as more open than you do, so I'm okay with leaving it that way.
I like to ask a question to the police officer in board of inquiry. Why did you fail to comply?
To me, it's more like, if I was a police officer and I, screwed up or something or other, and I didn't even screw up, it's like, well, wait a minute, I think I'm supposed to provide it myself, I don't know, but I called so-and-so, and, for medical assistance, and they didn't show up yet, and the guy died, and that's it.
And we specifically had that's specifically what you brought up at the PRC meeting last week.
Right.
And that's exactly what we said. We're like, that's not something, we don't call for help and then stand there and not do anything.
Police officers
Which is
have-
why I changed it specifically to
good.
provide it,
Let's
so
go
it can
on.
be us,
Do you-
fire,
Let's
medical
go on.
personnel. It could be George running by going, I got it. I'm certified.
No,
I
but,
got
I
it.
mean, do you, Terry, do you
I'm
understand
good.
that police officers have a legal liability to respond to anyone in need? Constitutionally, how they are supposed to do their oath, they have an obligation to respond.
Yeah.
Right, whether they are on duty or not, that is part
Yeah.
of their of their
Right.
oath. So I mean, if we are going to get into a discussion of police officers gonna be a bystander when somebody's in duress, doesn't need the assistance, they will be in violation of their oath of duty. And that's a much different conversation at a board of inquiry or any court of law that would not be in the favor of a police officer
Right.
than having the semantics of the language change.
Okay, I'm good. So, I have another one. 302.111. C. 302.11.1. C.
Restraint strap should be checked.
Restraint straps should be checked frequently for tightness and adjusted as necessary until the wrap is removed.
Okay,
The
well,
harness-
this is not spit hoods.
That's
We're
not
on spit hoods, we're not on.
We're not on spit hoods anymore.
Yeah, that's the wrap.
That's the wrap,
What are you talking about?
the wrap device. This section that you're referring to is the
302
wrap
guidelines.
device.
Guidelines for use of the wrap, which is-
Yeah, I'm just going through the
Good.
regulation.
Can we finish, great, I'm with you. Look, can we finish the spit hood mask portion, 302 portion? Before we jump into, where's the first?
That was the, here, well, that was the.
Well, it's part of 302, so.
That's right, so well, can we?
You should, yes, please.
Can we finish the spit hood mask sock, aspect of this conversation before we jumped? Yeah, cause 302 is handcuffing and restraint, so we're fine. Can we finish the conversation?
I'm okay with the rest of the spit hoods.
Okay, so it seems that the agreement here is that we think it should be a show on the ensuring that is for ventilation and breathing purposes.
I got that.
And the other thing that I supplied for wording, which is just for the chief to consider and for you folks to read, my printer needs red ink. It's right there.
I have a question, but I don't know if I'm part of this.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, I mean, this is all based on the understanding that people have this kind of narrative about visually what it is, regardless of the necessity for its use. So this is just language that I threw there. I'm asking for discussion, but I'm not asking necessarily for approval, you to acquiesce to the language change. I think the chief should consider something in this nature, because it sets an example of that the department is cognizant of how it is perceived, seen when it's used. And the language that I said was, the department is cognizant of how the use of spit hoods, mask socks can be interpreted by the community, and will only use them under such exigent conditions that delineated in this policy. Right? And you can take the exigent part out. Under such conditions as delineated in this policy. I think exigent, that's a different kind of process.
You have to leave different.
But what I'm saying is that the same thing that we talk about the use of force policy and saying that we believe in the sanctity of life, right? That thing that we put in there, the same thing that we talked about, the processes by which bias policing exists or doesn't exist, and recognizing that blah, 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 the department has put into place this policy about bias policing, whatever it is, right? The same way that the department finds at times adding language that shores up to the community, says to the community, we get it, we understand it, let me tell you the conditions in which we're gonna use this, and then we have said the conditions in which they're going to be used. Not only that, we have gone way beyond the norm to say, these are the medical conditions that we're gonna be looking at in order to defray any and all circumstances in which this could be a concern. And I think, in my opinion, if that's what we do here for this specific part of the 302, I mean, I think we completely balance out the narrative out there of why the police officers should not use them, which to me is the whole backward point of this. So this is something that I offer to the police department for some consideration. Obviously, we want to have this conversation of 302 at the next meeting, up and down approval, because it has to go to city council. That's why we're meeting today. easy. I don't know if the reason why we're missing today is because we have to get
Yeah.
this 302 to city council and to the department.
Yeah.
So this is for the consideration of the department, language for you to consider, adding something there that stipulates something.
Mhm.
And you guys have done it before in other general orders. We're cognizant of whatever, this is the reason we're gonna use it, and as I said, I'm on the record to say that it's a tool that you should guys should use. And I will probably go to city council that day and, talk in favor of it too as well. So that's my part on 302. I don't know how you folks feel about language of that nature. This is for your consideration.
Yeah, I'll bring it back and talk to the chief about it.
Take exigent out.
Without the word exigent, well,
And
yeah.
they can tweak it. I mean, we'll have to have that back to us.
Do the others agree? Then you can tell, then Captain Willard say the subcommittee is asking for this.
Can you read that one more time, because mine is
Oh, here.
a little
Here's a
blurry.
better.
Oh, yeah, it's in my red ink died.
Oh, okay.
The department is cognizant of how the use of subsequent mass stops can be interpreted by the community and will only use them under such conditions as delineated in this policy. Delineated.
To another remove, and otherwise remove exit conditions, which I appreciate, because that
Yeah.
brings a different kind of legal standard there.
Yeah, it sets a different standard, not exactly. But that doesn't have to be the language. I think the discussion
Something
here
like that.
is whether the department should add some language of that nature. Whether they see the need to add language of that nature, because it kind of like fights against a narrative that is out there. The department does not care how it is perceived. I mean,
I
so-
don't have any problem with that.
what about you, EZ?
Yeah, I don't have any problem. Well, one thing I would suggest, I think one thing you could say is, the entire first clause up through community, so it can be interpreted by the community, or you could say the community will interpret it. And then a comma or semicolon, and say accordingly, spit mask may be placed on person, may only. Just say it in a few words, but it doesn't really matter, let's just start it. So you could just eliminate the whole thing about conditions as delineated in this policy, because the next time, so you could just say, accordingly, spit masks may only be placed on persons in custody when the officer. But that's, I'm fine.
Some language.
I understand.
No, I mean, because obviously, I mean, we don't wanna.
Are you agreeing with him or not? I think it's,
No,
it's
I
better,
agree.
no, it's better for, I'm.
It's fine, we can stick with George's language.
But I think George just shouldn't give it to the captain like that.
No, I mean,
Give
it's,
some language.
I mean, it's, my whole thing with people in custody is that, I mean, is the inference that they're in custody, of course, because they're
Yeah,
in
I don't
custody.
mean to
we're gonna
limit it
put
to
a
people
mask
in
on.
custody, I'm just saying, maybe it should say accordingly, officers,
How would it read?
it would read, accordingly. Yeah, so, cause here's my, you're saying it should only be done in conditions delineated in this policy. The reality is the policy delineated, the conditions delineated is the next sentence.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is just saying community, comma, or excuse me, accordingly spit, so eliminating the rest of that, because we're now moving into the conditions, so then just say accordingly, spit mask only may be placed upon persons, and it has all the exact same language.
I mean, to be honest with you, you can say the department is cognizant of how the use of spit hoods masks can be interpreted by the community, period.
Period. Yeah.
Spit hoods masks may be placed on persons in custody when the officer is not.
That's exactly what I'm thinking.
That in itself will fulfill it.
I've already,
Yeah, take
yeah.
everything else out.
Yeah.
I've already, like I always said, already said,
Yeah.
I'm bringing it back,
Yeah.
and the chief and I can look about it, I took some notes here.
So, community period,
Yeah.
and then goes into the next sentence. That is
Oh.
it.
Yeah.
Okay,
The department is cognizant or a word of that, on how the use of spit hoods can be interpreted by the community, period.
Period.
Spit hoods may be masks may be
Okay.
placed upon persons in custody,
Yeah.
that goes. I mean, that would be my only wordsmithing addition, just to balance that. I mean,
I got it,
I wanna get you 6 votes.
I got it.
I'm trying to get you 6 votes.
Only
I mean, we have 5, we might have 5. Terry, let's continue with 302, sir. Terry's always a wild card. I hate to play poker with Terry. Checkers, I'm down to, because I know where I'm going.
The wrap.
Terry, yeah, let's continue with the wrap, sir.
Yeah, the reps. On C, 302.11.1 C. Says, restraint straps should be checked frequently for tightness and adjusted as necessary until the wrap is removed. The harness straps should never be tightened to a point where they interfere with the person's breathing, ability to breathe. That sounds pretty important to me.
So what's your recommended language? I'm with you, but let's.
I mean, why aren't those, wouldn't those be shall?
Okay, let's get the recommended language. So I'm willing to say that second one should be shall.
Yeah, definitely the second
Okay.
one, yeah.
I'm sorry, I lost you, where are you?
302.11.1,
See.
and then the little c,
Okay,
restraint shall.
okay, got it, thank you.
There's two shoulds, one in the first sentence, one in the second.
Uh-huh.
Seems like everybody agrees at least that the second sentence should be shall.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree.
I think that would be good. Okay.
First sentence.
So does that make sense to you, Captain?
Yeah, give me a second.
Or do you have your reasonable, and a reason why he should fail to comply? Be a shall, but not be a shall. Right, that's the review, right? That's what
There
we
you
talked
go,
about.
yeah.
That's what we talked about.
Okay, the next one's D, right after that. The restrained person should be continually monitored by the officer while the wrap is in use. The officer should ensure that the person does not roll onto and remain on his or her stomach, right? Now, I could go with both shalls, but I think in that case, the second one should be shall anyway. It's not should ensure, should be shall. And I'll tell you where it kind of conflicts. If we drop down to G, just below there, it says, once secured, the person should be placed in a seated or upright position, secured with a seat belt, and shall not be placed on his or her stomach. So the shall not, to me, shows a level of importance there that it doesn't show in D.
That's because of the vehicle, I think. Because one situation is the vehicle, and G is specifically a vehicle.
But I'm talking about the one that just says that they shouldn't be able to roll over and remain on his or her stomach in D. And basically, it says the same thing in the second portion of G.
Right, but G is specific for a vehicle.
It's not.
It doesn't say that.
Well,
I was gonna
where
say-
else are they gonna get a seated upright position with a seatbelt?
Yeah, the wrap just is a wrap, I mean, cause I'm just, the wrap
On
thing
child
doesn't
seat
have,
on the curb?
the wrap doesn't have a seatbelt.
Right.
The wrap mechanism doesn't have a seatbelt.
Yeah, no, I see that.
Okay.
They're referring
Okay,
to.
so what's the difference in the intent? What, I mean,
Well, they're referring
the
to-
idea is they shouldn't be able to roll over in their stomach, wherever the hell they are. What's the difference of where they are?
Well, outside, there's still airflow. I think the intent here, and I didn't write it, but the intent here is like, we don't typically put people in the back seat of a car where the doors are closed and the windows are closed.
Right.
And there might not be sufficient airflow, and there's a term you may have heard of, positional asphyxia.
Yeah,
And so I think that's what it's referring to in the back of a patrol car.
okay, so it says shall not be placed, right? So, I mean, that's,
Shall be seated upright
Okay.
position, secured with a seatbelt.
so
Shall
let me
not
ask
be
this, and maybe I have the wrong perception. So is being placed, I'm back on D now, it says being, it says, should ensure that the person does not roll onto and remain on his or her stomach. That also has the same ramifications, right? It's like if you're in this Straight jacket.
Indicates a generally required or expected action absent a rational basis. Now, what if I didn't have a spit mask and you're spitting on me, but you're in a wrap, and you are already laying down on the ground, and you roll over on your stomach, or we turn you over until we can get a spit mask there or a spit hood. So if you make it shall not, then you take away that ability to make a decision and prevent something else from happening. Once again, absent a rational basis.
Okay, run the spit mask part by me again. What was your?
Say I don't have a spit mask readily
Yeah.
available. You're in a wrap,
Yeah.
right? You're down on the ground, which is typically that's how we have to place
Right,
somebody into a
right,
wrap.
right.
So they're on the ground. Now you start spitting at me, but I don't have a spit mask
Yeah.
available to me. And one way that I could even some people are already laying down or have rolled over on their own. I'm just using an example. And I can keep you in that position or even hold you on your side,
Yeah.
right? So that until such time as we can get a spit hood to put it over you so that you can't spit at me anymore,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So that gives the officer some discretion to be able to maneuver. If you make it shall not, then they can't do it. And then once again, we're at the point where somebody could be spitting on me, jeopardizing me, my family, other employees, other people present.
Yeah.
I think the difference here is the vehicle is a confined space.
Yeah.
Vehicles get hot.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as we all know, we don't leave children, we try not to leave children in the back seat or animals in the back, yeah, you said, or animals in the back seat without ventilation, because there's different conditions inside a vehicle.
Okay, I'll go for it. Thank you for that. Let's see if I'm gonna do another one here or not.
Well, just so right there, I'm fine with the way it is, but it does say, it should say wants to secure it in the vehicle.
Wait, say that again?
G,
Mm-hmm.
should say wants security in the vehicle.
We can have that.
That adds, Terry, that adds another level there. That adds a step.
Yeah, that helps. I think that's all I have. You know, in general, though, if we're talking in general, it's like, do you guys have any other things? On the handcuffing. So I'm just kind of,
I do have another.
Which part? Are you talking in the very beginning?
you know, I just had a general question about handcuffing, because I noticed you go to some lengths to say it's not required. Yet, let's see, what am I looking at? Okay, I'm looking at 302.9, second paragraph. Although recommended for most arrest situations, handcuffing is not an absolute requirement. Officers should consider handcuffing any person they reasonably believe warrants that degree of restraint. However, officers should not conclude that every person should be handcuffed. So, you know, I guess that basically is just a decision of the officer. And, you know, there's a lot of stuff in the community when you hear people, or when you do these hearings and all that, or blah, 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 about how many, you know, if they really need to be handcuffed. And I'm just wondering how that decision is reached, and I guess that's just a personal decision of the officer, right? If he feels like they need to, then he handcuffs.
Well, there's a ton of case law that covers it. Case law,
Yeah.
in terms of officer safety and such like that. But additionally, I think, so I believe our old policy, maybe 2 ago, was everybody in custody shall be handcuffed, period, in the story. So I think what they're interpreting here, or what they're trying to apply, is that not every situation is an arrest. So for example, you might have somebody who's in crisis, and perhaps in your judgment, and the person is 5'1" and 95 pounds, right? I'm 6'2", 240 pounds. I'm not gonna be too concerned if somebody's in crisis to maybe handcuff them immediately. However, if they're gonna go to jail, they're gonna be handcuffed. Period, end of story. They can't come into the jail without being handcuffed. So I think what this is doing is, once again, giving an officer some discretion.
Before it was required.
Right. Like when I came on board.
You detain or.
Yeah, like.
Arrest.
Right. Now, and once again, just because I detain somebody, with reasonable suspicion of committing a crime,
Yeah.
doesn't mean I have to handcuff them. But maybe if it was an armed robbery, and I think the person matches the description, and I have reasonable suspicion to detain them, I can guarantee you, after my 25 years, you're gonna be handcuffed until I figure out if you have weapons, and until we figure out now whether or not you committed this crime. Because I've been at many scenes where even somebody's handcuffed and they take off running down the street.
Yeah, so you see, that's it right there, Terry. So there is the am I free to leave? Am I being detained? Am I being arrested? And then therefore you might be in custody. But the custody discretion is if you're detained, are you under the custody of the police department as you're detained, right? That's the area that's great there. But whether it's safety to the public, safety to the police officer, there's also the question of intention, possibility of fleeing the
Sure.
scene. So that's where the handcuffing comes in. If the police officer, the discretion think there's a danger to the police officer, to the public, or the person, this supposed person might flee, right? Whether they're being detained, they're not free to leave, they're arrested, and now they're in custody, right? So that's where that is. So I think it's what he's saying is that if the reasonable circumstance, the person, if I don't reasonably believe, if I'm being detained as a police officer, am I free to leave? And he says you're not free to leave, then you know you're detained.
Right.
That's the answer. The moment that police officer says to you, you're not free to leave, you know you're detained.
Yeah.
You're under detention, whether you're in handcuffs or not, you're not free to leave. So if I am combative, if the police officer believes that restraining me in handcuffs is going to minimize danger to the public, to the police officer, or possibly fleeing, that's where the handcuffing comes into play. So the discretion, that's where the discretion is.
Yeah,
I
I'm
think
not
the
objecting to it, I'm just trying to find out.
No, but I mean, for the public
Right.
who's listening, who might not know what that is,
Right.
that is the level there. I think what you're expressing is, what we've heard from the community is the young Latino, African American, man, youth, who is being detained, and then there are handcuffs, and the argument is, we see that young man in handcuffs sitting on the curb.
On the curb, yeah.
And so that's the dynamic, so, I mean, so the police officer will have to effectively articulate the circumstances by which under this general order now, which is a little more discretion than automatically handcuffing an individual, why he or she felt that the handcuffs are necessary. Which actually, I think it's more problematic for the police officer, to be honest with you. If they automatically, before you handcuff somebody, and that's visibly, it's not probably the right thing to do because of what we just said. I mean, it seems to me that it has given the police an obligation now, somehow, to justify that. And then we are in different conversations now, and whether the handcuffing itself is a reportable use of force. That's the next conversation for
That's
us.
another-
We should be level 1.
Right.
Which the chief doesn't wanna get into discussion on level 1, 2, and 3 with me now.
Yeah.
Doesn't want to, but I'm already there, knowing that what will be a level 1, level 2, level 3 use of force, and
Yeah,
how is
yeah.
that reported?
So we'll have some discussion around that on use of force.
I'm giddy with excitement. That's use of force is my thing. It's my raison d'être.
Yeah.
Raison d'être.
Anyway, that was the last question I had.
Okay, I have one more, and it's just related,
Just a little French in your food.
the 302